in our motto. We increase the odds for success in offshore wind, and that counts for basically everyone in the industry. It counts for supply chain company, it's valid for decision makers on a political level, and it's valid for developers.
This is the Gamechangers Video Podcast. Stories of people, ideas, and technologies that are making the world a better and more sustainable place.
I'm Jonathan Winch.
And I'm Michael Best. Good to have you on board. Today's guests are Kristian Jacobsen and Ravn, two of the three founders of Green Ducklings, a company that's changing the game in the offshore wind industry.
Thank you for turning up.
Yeah. Thank you so much for inviting.
Yep, it's good to have you on the show.
Welcome to the Gamechangers.
Happy to be so.
Yep, very interested to hear what you got to say about Green Ducklings. Okay, so first up, I think if you guys can introduce yourselves. Both of you are called Kristian. We could maybe start with you, Kristian.
Well, actually,
the old guy. I think it's important to start with me.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Simply because I'm Kristian, number one in our company.
Did you have to fight over it? Who gets one and who gets two?
No, that was a top management decision by our former principal. So he found it rather confusing that we were two Kristians, and hence somebody needed to be number one. I got into the company first. Pretty simple. Did my master thesis on the Chinese wind adventure and the development of Chinese wind. And then I stepped right into the industry back in 2008, rather disruptive time with financial distress all around the world. And then on the back of that, offshore wind really picking up momentum since it became such an integral part of delivery of our global targets and our energy transition. So really a key element to succeed as society, you can say. And then since 2008, been part of the industry, have worked in supply chain, worked on rather complicated large steel structures, some of the critical components, including foundations, vessels, turbines as well, that we use to essentially fuel our industry and deliver green power to society.
Well, that makes me Kristian number two, and now you know the story behind it. Some would say I'm actually Kristian number one because I used to be his boss. So I'm just trying to steer him a bit doing this. Now it's
unsuccessfully.
I never managed to succeed either. It's I'm the other Kristian, slightly different background. I'm an engineer by trade, and then I did some commercial additions to my educational background. But ever since I've been 29, I've been top management positions in the energy industry. That sounds better than naming oil and gas. Mm-hmm. So I grew up in the offshore oil and gas business with a lot of big projects and a lot of engineers. And I headed some global responsibilities in that before I joined the offshore wind industry. I'm the newcomer, as you could tell by Kristian.
Yeah, you had previous employment.
You've come from the dark side.
I came from the dark side, which is, we'll probably get back to that at some stage, but it's actually quite an advantage because there's a lot coming from other energy sectors that can be relevant when you scale the offshore wind business. And when you create a new industry, it's a baby by nature. It has it's things it has to learn as an industry.
Yeah, but what kind of, you said you're engineering. What kind of engineer?
Structural dynamics. It's something with vibrations and bridges.
Okay.
They're really a differential equation stuff.
Okay.
So that's your background. Thanks for that. One of the other things we really want to touch on is your company's called Green Ducklings. And right on the table here, I see you brought a
what's
Green
with this?
Duckling. You're both wearing Green Duckling badges. You're wearing green. What's behind the name?
Yeah, first and foremost, there's a obvious hidden reference to the ugly duckling of A.C. Anderson. So that is at least part of the DNA. And as everybody knows, that specific duckling turns into a beautiful swan at some point. And then we decided to take part of that storyline and DNA and use it in our setting and our industry, essentially in the hope to convert many more companies in our industry to transition into renewable energy and obviously transition into a green industry.
Went to one of these gatherings in the Confederation of Danish Industries, and there was this John Elkington, which is by some mentioned to be the father of sustainable economy theory. Mm-hmm. And he introduced at that event in front of the whole industry of Denmark, he introduced this green swan theory, which is somehow related to black swan theory, something that all of a sudden is a game changer, just to stick to your reference, in a way that no one could have foreseen. The theory is basically trying to change economic theory, which is mainly related to financial performance, and adding two other dimensions to that. One is social wealth creation, and another is environmental wealth creation. And those three parameters, you can perform better than your competitors, basically. Then if you do that on two of the three parameters, then you're named a green swan. It's something that is it's a good mission for a company.
Yeah.
When we founded Green Ducklings, as Kristian alluded to, then we had a mission of supporting companies in their transition from other industries into the offshore wind industry.
And when you say from other industries, are you talking about from oil and gas, or does it go wider than that?
It goes wider. It can be oil and gas. It can be
come from IT,
machining factory, IT,
AI learning, so whatever other industry that you have available in a society. Like I think Norway is a great example, where obviously they have had a lot of oil and gas, have provided a lot of wealth for the Norwegian society, but they also recognize now that they need to transition as a society. And then on the back of that, you just simply have a lot of companies and ideas that originate from oil and gas that can benefit our industry and renewable energy. Whereas in the US, it's completely different dynamics. In New York or New Jersey, you don't necessarily have a lot of oil and gas, but there you need to transition some other industries and other competencies to essentially grow an industry.
So it's basically any company that has some sort of competency that can then apply that competency to offshore wind. You're not necessarily moving away from something that's bad to something that's good, or it's...
Well, no, it's not about good or bad. It's basically identifying the parts of the DNA, the existing DNA of the company that can be used for benefit of offshore wind.
Okay. Yeah.
And then also identifying which gaps do you have in your current DNA in order to be successful in entering the offshore wind industry. That's basically what it's all about. This is what we founded the company to do. And then we came up with the name Green Ducklings because we help other companies, decision makers in companies, to make their companies become green swans.
Tomorrow's swans.
Exactly.
So how are you changing the world for the better through what you do?
That is a big question.
Even more specifically, how are you igniting hope and accelerating change?
Yeah, that's
which is why we put you on the show.
Yep, it's the tagline.
That's what we're all about.
Yeah, I personally, I'm not a big believer in us being like the initiator or the reason for changing society. Like we don't put ourselves on a pedestal to say that that is our one thing we do and that we go out and pitch to companies. But we recognize the challenge, like everybody else, that we are in a global climate crisis. I think it's all the companies that we work with that do the hard work. They are the ones doing the energy transition, supporting it. We work with developers, we work with supply chain companies, we work with governments or states in our capacity. So we essentially just make them a better version of themselves and try to facilitate that they make the right decisions at the right time in order to deliver as an industry.
Okay, so can you make that some really concrete for our audience? Can you sort of say exactly what do you do?
In our motto, we increase the odds for success in offshore wind, and that counts for basically everyone in the industry. It counts for supply chain company, it's valid for decision makers on a political level, and it's valid for developers. So whatever we do, we don't guarantee, but we promise that we will increase their odds for success in their transition and making the offshore wind industry happen. We support all these different decision makers of the industry in making efficient decisions. And because we do that, we are actually really good at bridging interest across technology companies, across project companies, across developers, across political decision makers. And we try to compile all that information in a way that makes meaningful sense to the specific context of the decision maker.
Okay.
A bit
So essentially boiling down complexity.
Yeah.
And seeing the total picture in a more holistic way. So you look at an issue or a topic, at least not only from that one-eyed perspective, but you essentially take account of all the very, very complicated moving parts of our industry that all need to work together in order for us to deliver on the promises of our industry.
But let's put it this way. You asked for very specific examples. Engineering companies, helicopter transportation companies, drone companies, heavy steel plate manufacturers, and political decision makers, like could be governments or local states or whoever have ambitions and need advice and a strong hand in the back. Now imagine I would be the CEO of a company or would be in the board of directors of a supply chain company. I say, well, now we want to take part of this big growth story, offshore wind, because we want to make business. Then you can do that in many ways.
So you're simply applying a wide range of experience and knowledge and so on to someone who perhaps is new in the business. And I mean, there must be a hell of a learning curve.
Learning curve for any company that at least wants to get into the industry, and even for companies operating in the industry, it is also quite complicated to stay in the industry, to become profitable, and to decide, okay, where do I want to focus my attention? So you need to understand the totality of that ecosystem being offshore wind, or then it's otherwise you essentially end up planning facilities, capacities, planning investments. And if just one other huge investments, and just if one other element fail in that journey, then you are not able to capitalize on that investment.
So you're talking about a kind of an arena where these players and all different parts of the game are independent of each other, and any one failing can damage everything else. Is that right?
To configure or to build an offshore wind farm, obviously you need a turbine. Since foundations are not energy generating themselves. But you also need a foundation in the sea. You need a ship that can install it. You need cables that can connect it to the offshore substation. You need an offshore substation. Sometimes you need an offshore converter station. You need an export cable. You need a landfall. You need an off-taker, someone who buys the power that you produce and wants to pay whatever it costs in local context. And then you need a permitting regime, you need regulatory elements that are in place. So it's a very complicated mix from having the idea of putting a turbine into the sea and then making it happen, actually.
Give us an example.
But I think the example of steel manufacturing. So it basically starts in the development phase. Somebody needs to design a foundation. And here we are talking very, very large tubular structures weighing in today's environment 1,500, 2,000 tons. And an engineer like Kristian, you can sit, and not you specifically, but an engineer can sit and design whatever it is that fits onto that paper. And that can become a foundation weighing 3,000 tons that can be engineered and provided again as a delivery by that engineer. But then that engineer doesn't necessarily sit with the full picture of what is then feasible in terms of also building that foundation. So from paper or a 3D model, it needs to be converted into a facility, essentially. So you need some steel plates that go into it. Those steel plates are exceptionally heavy. They come in limited supply. There's quite a few or very few suppliers of heavy steel plates in the industry. It needs to go into a manufacturing facility. We have a few of those here in North Europe. that facility obviously needs to handle that design that the engineer sat with. That is often also possible, but then it needs to go offshore. And there you are working with vessels that are currently working on the very limit of what they can lift in the industry. And if you do not see that totality of what that design does or impacts it has on the fabricator, on the steel plates, on the vessels, on the marine ecosystem of the wind farm, then you essentially end up risking that you design something that cannot be delivered by the industry. So again, it's an industry designed by engineers, and there you just push the envelope of what is physically feasible as an industry.
So bigger turbines, faster installations.
Yeah, 10 years ago, what was the size of a turbine that they thought was about as big as we were going to get?
I think when I became part of the industry, again, looking at Chinese turbine OEMs, they were promoting a 5 megawatt turbine.
That was huge at that time.
That was huge. The biggest one in Europe was 2.3, 3.6, and the 3.6 was like the very, very new generation turbine. And here we have some Chinese promoting a 5 megawatt. Holy smokes, how to do that? Down the line, just a couple of years, then we are looking at a 6 megawatt. It becomes a 7 megawatt, 8 megawatt, 9 megawatt, and then it just escalates. And it seems like that race to the top has not really stopped. But unfortunately, that race to the top also means a big fall to the bottom for many of the suppliers, because when you consistently and continuously push for that technology envelope, it comes with the sacrifice of profit in the supply chain. And we are not saying that we should necessarily stop that push for bigger turbines, bigger foundations, but you need to be aware what constraints you put on yourself as an industry by taking that choice. And that is a complicated game.
I think the biggest challenge at the moment is that it used to be a very Northern European phenomenon. So we had a local industry, we built a supply chain, it developed over many years. So the first turbines were put more than 30 years ago today. And it developed gradually from being something which was promising technology to being industrialized. You have the experience in Northern Europe still, but now you need to scale it to Taiwan, to Japan, to the US, to Southern Europe, to the Mediterranean, to floating wind. It just expands a lot. And that comes with a lot of challenges, because in every market you need to somehow reinvent the offshore wind industry in the local context.
It sounds, on the basis of the complexity and the number of suppliers involved, the number of components involved and so on, and how steep those learning curves could be for any one of those, it sounds almost impossible.
It does.
To take, for example, a country that has not got anything in place to being able to actually install offshore wind in a reasonable time at a reasonable cost.
It's politicians. They have their targets. They push them forward, and then we try to just catch up as an industry. That trickles down to the developer. It trickles down to the turbine OEM, saying or putting forward forecasts of what they need to achieve as individual companies, and then trickles down to the supply chain. You need to go in not blindly optimistic to that game.
So that sounds to me like it's a very big decision to make that step into offshore wind. It sounds like there's potentially a lot of risk involved.
And
investment. So is it a wise choice for companies to make that move?
We believe so, and we believe that it needs to happen because the alternative is worse. What we are mainly focused at in Green Ducklings is not the Danish market. We are very much focused on the new markets of offshore wind, because this is where we can do a big difference. So take the US as an example. You have a lot of appetite of offshore wind in the northeastern part, especially of the US. But you don't have the heritage that we have in Europe. So there are a lot of aspects in that. The local states, they want to build, set high ambitions. They want to build a lot of offshore wind. And if you build a facility, let's say that it's a factory for the foundations or the big towers or whatever, then if the engineers didn't design it for the US context, but they did it for a European context where you have a lot of those heavy steel plate manufacturers that Kristian mentioned before, then you might get as low as 5 to 10 to 15% of local plates that can feed your facility. And then you need to import plates from Europe. When you do that, you're hit by what is called the Trump tax, because it's non-manufactured steel. And therefore you're taxated heavily to get those into the US, so everything just becomes expensive and a bit stupid, because the main value add will still be from Europe, and then you just turn the steel in your local facility. So then you need to focus on the steel plates. How do I get steel plates into this? Okay, then you do your foundation or your tower manufacturing, then you need a good port. A good port, something about water depth, bearing capacity, lots of space, then you can put that in place. But then you need a vessel that can go into that port and pick up the stuff that you manufactured at the quayside. These are very, very big items. Then you need a vessel. Then you run into a Jones Act, which is a local American thing, that you have to be built and operated. Your vessel has to be built and operated from the US. So there are no vessels suitable for doing installation of your big stuff. Then you need to come up with feeder concepts to barges that can pick up the goods at the quayside, because they're allowed to go into the US port, feed it out to the offshore site where you have a European vessel waiting to install your foundation or your turbine or whatever.
You know, it doesn't take long listening to you guys to realize that don't try this at home, right? If I were a developer, for example, wanting to get this going in a market that's quite fresh, then it'd sort of start with a complete brain dump from your side, where you just make me aware of many, many, many different things.
I think a lot of our clients, our developers, they do a hell of a lot of homework. So we don't go in as the oracle coming and giving the ultimate truth on how to do it. They come prepared. But what we can help facilitate is understanding some of the finer dynamics or complexities of a situation. Again, sometimes we're also hit in the industry by factors that are completely without or beyond our reach or impact. And there, the companies are not better than the individuals. So one department responsible for, just to say, cables for the industry, they would potentially sit with one forecast model of what is required from our industry. If that forecast model is not the same as the forecast model of the guy sitting in foundations, as the guy sitting in,
of course, yeah,
then you end up with a very distorted picture of where are the biggest complexities of our industry. And there in some cases, some developers go in exceptionally well prepared, and that they have big organizations internally that work with that. But even in that setting, there are so many moving parts or finer elements that are not being tested or pressure tested that can essentially mean that you end up with a huge oversight or lack of supply chain capacity.
So what you want to understand as a developer is, do you reserve capacity because you think there will be further scarcity in the future and it might prevent you from building your offshore wind farm? Or do you wait and see what the market brings? This is a decision that takes quite some analysis to come up with a good answer to that one, because it might come with additional cost, it might come with additional risk if you take on capacity before you are actually ready for it.
We can probably all agree that there's a lot of negative news out there about where the world is going.
We need more uplifting stories that can ignite hope and accelerate the changes toward the brighter future that we all want.
I want it. You want it?
I want it.
Our listeners are the people that are really curious about all kinds of things. They want to know about all kinds of new ideas and technologies that are going to change the world.
So if your company has a game changer, get a hold of us. We would love to hear from you.
I know it's very unclear what we do, because we talk a lot. We believe that we know a lot. We have a very holistic view to a lot of things. But everything boils down to doing analysis, doing research, utilizing networks of someone who really knows these details, and then trying to compile a very complex, often very engineering-like context into something that makes commercial decision-making sense for the decision maker. This is basically what we do. And it boils down to normally, if we were the CEO, these were the 5 opportunities we would look out for. These would be the 5 risks that we would look out for in this very, very complicated mix. That requires good analysis, it requires good teams, and it requires someone who dares to say, this is kind of the essence, knowing that there's a lot more to it. Overall, the opportunity in offshore wind is you have huge political ambitions. So if you only listen to the politicians, you'll have growth rates of maybe 25% year on year in a decade onwards. That's a great market to be in. But the flip side is that it's not built by political ambitions. That sets the starting point.
I think if you look at the, let's say, the political ambitions for 2050, then we are looking around 800 gigawatt of offshore winds.
2050, 800.
And that is excluding China.
Okay.
And then again, if we look at the short-term perspective, we have a European setting where we are currently looking at, I think it's more than 200 gigawatt of capacity, 250 gigawatt of offshore wind ambition capacity.
Yeah.
And the realism is that we will be able to deliver maybe 140, 130 gigawatt of that capacity by 2030.
Today we have less than 40.
But we have less than 40 today.
Is that worldwide, less than 40? Or
yeah, basically the world is Northern Europe if you exclude China when it comes to offshore wind.
Yeah. So we have quite some growth.
We spend more than 30 years building less than 40 gigawatts, and in the next 6 years we need to build more than 100. So that tells a bit about the challenge.
It is a steep mountain.
So in our opinion, it's somewhere between 40 and 60% of the political ambitions by 2030 that can actually be realized. And it's still a big growth rate. It's just a bit smaller than the political ambitions.
So when we talk about igniting hope, like we like to talk about on our podcast, are you that hope with these groups of people, these companies?
For instance, we are supporting in the US. You don't find those very suitable assets in all the states that you need. So there you have to work with mom and pop shops that wants to understand how their welding business, how their local glass fiber business or whatever could fit into offshore wind, help them understand what is the opportunity, what are their lacks, what are their suitable assets, which assets does not make much sense to present to the client, who would the clients be, which kind of contracts should they expect.
And what is the timing of it?
So you can give them hope that they can actually address the right issues and solve it as well as possible.
Yeah, and how do you play the game and where do you play?
So how do 15 people, which I understand is approximately your core team, how do you guys deal with so many different potential stakeholders, companies that want to talk to you, politicians that want to talk to you, embassies that want to talk to you? Aren't you spread extremely thinly? And how do you have so much knowledge in all the various aspects?
Our team is split between very senior people of the industry having this holistic view of what is important for decision-making in the different stakeholders to the offshore wind business. And then some very young, talented people out of university, either commercial or engineering degrees or whatever, that captures the essence of what we do. And then we have a good network. So what we don't know, we always know someone who knows. And normally we would not take that one source as this is then the truth.
And I think that's also what we provide to our clients. Again, we tend to use a GPS analogy that you need to go from A to B to C. You don't want to go the long way around in order to reach your end destination. You really want to home in and say, okay, I know that is where I'm going, and this is the exact route to reach that end destination.
Yeah.
So when I heard you talk about the bottlenecks that you're identifying, maybe is that future growth area that you guys are involved in, it makes me think of the old saying, you're only as strong as the weakest link in the chain.
Exactly.
So if you guys are looking for those weak links, can you give us some idea of what these typically are now? I mean, is that changing all of the time and for every project?
It's a moving target. So let me give you an example. You have for the next generation wind farms, there'll be 1 gigawatt plus. It doesn't say a lot to many people, but
That's big.
It's big. It's somewhere like 80 turbines, very state-of-the-art.
We need to fact check it, but one of these turbines being 15 megawatt or so, I think it can power 15,000 households.
Right.
So it's a lot.
From one turbine.
From one turbine.
Wow.
Based on the annual production. So it's a lot.
Yeah.
Okay.
But to do this, you need a technology called HVDCs. So for that HVDC technology, you have 3 providers in the world. You have GE, you have Siemens, you have Hitachi Energy. Those are the ones that can supply those export connections. And it's a very big converter station that is in the middle of the sea that through an export HVDC cable exports the power to the landfall, basically, and ties it into the grid. For that, that is one example of a bottleneck. And the big thing is that each one of those bottlenecks, vessels, foundation manufacturing facilities, substation facilities, converter stations, heavy steel plate facilities,
ports,
ports, each one come with an investment of, let's say, it depends, of course, but let's say it's maybe $500 million and a delivery time of 3 to 4 years. You don't do that in parallel with your project. You need to front load the investment.
Yeah, that is incredible that this can even be possibly done.
If you don't understand that complexity as a supplier, then you risk putting up investments in facilities for capacity that will not be built because, again, capacity is lacking in other parts of the value chain.
Wow.
Sometimes an event happens in our industry that disrupts the way we operate and the way we deploy offshore wind, or at least the way we thought we deployed offshore wind. Overnight, the fundamentals or the game change, and then you need to go into a different mode. Examples of that, zero bidding in the Dutch and Danish sector some years ago. We sat in confidential rooms with certain developers who were so far from that new reality of a zero bid and unsubsidized.
Can you just explain for the audience what a zero bid is?
So it's an unsubsidized offshore wind farm.
Okay.
Where the whole premise of the industry at that time was that we needed subsidy to survive as an industry. And then a couple of developers go in and provide a zero bid. And that fundamentally shook the industry to reinvent ourselves, to completely change the way we operate as an industry. We work in a fast-paced environment, but sometimes you need to sit down and really understand what is behind this complexity in order to understand how to move forward. We've seen it, all these disruptions in the supply chain leading to increases of up to 40% of the cost of building an offshore wind farm. And again, this is not your average household budget.
It's not a commodity. It's not consumer price
You're
index.
spending,
it's very local inflation to the industry.
You're spending billions of pounds or billions of euros in developing this infrastructure for the benefit of society as well. And when something so fundamentally changed that you increase the cost of it by 40%, then we saw that effect also in 23 with a solicitation round in the United Kingdom, where nobody on the developer side bid in. So meaning that even though government had high plans to develop offshore wind and they put forward a possibility to develop offshore wind, there was simply no appetite to bid in because the fundamentals and the economics of it didn't fit.
It was a capped auction, so there was a certain cap to how much tariff you could bid in with to gain your power purchase agreements.
And nobody wanted to go there.
And nobody wanted to. They couldn't make their business case add up.
So let's pivot from that for a moment, because it sounds to me like you spend a lot of your time with complexity, with things that your clients are worried about or should be worried about, or you're trying to paint a picture that is not necessarily rosy, right? But a picture that is saying there's a lot of opportunity, but there's a lot of things that can stand in the way. So balancing that out and just in your work life, I understand that one of your company values is simply fun, having fun. Can you talk about that? And then tell us why fun is important to you and how you have fun with it.
I think for me personally, working in the industry for so many years, meeting so many people, it also today enables us to have this extended network where we can go out and consult friends of the industry. And you only
we have had fun with at least one time before,
and that really creates this. It's still a fairly small industry in the totality of the world, at least, but that enables us to work with people who are on the same mission, who see the same complexity, but from very, very many different angles. And the ability to sit and talk to those people, or our mandate to talk to those people, is because we had fun with them at some point over the last many, many years. Yeah.
No, it's a bit of being self-ironic. It's a bit of having fun. It's a bit of sharing good moments. It brings you to the deeper discussions and makes you engage with people. So I think fun is our mandate to also engage with a lot of people. No one wants to work with people that don't have fun at all. It's boring.
I could not agree more.
But I think it's so important to balance fun with, again, what we call blind optimism. So, again, going into the industry and just believing that it's going to be as great as the politicians say. One guy, he told me, it's actually one of our executive advisors told me, Kristian, you are the consultants of bad news, because we tend to maybe present a pessimistic picture, and we don't see it as pessimistic. We look at it like a realistic optimism. So taking a realistic view on our industry, and then all of us being very much aware that yes, there is a lot of complexity, there is a lot of risk, and there is a lot of investment, there is a lot of factors and then wheels and that need to tie together in order for this industry to really work. But if you can't meet each other eye to eye and have fun, then we're definitely not going to succeed as an industry.
Kind of the harder it is, the more fun you have to have.
Yeah, it's
really.
Exactly. It's a very serious mission, actually. But it doesn't mean that you can't have fun on the way. And this has been, I think it's been very important to all of us, including our employees along the way. We are very informal in our way of working. We are not very hierarchic like typical management consultancies where you start at one end and then you grow, and then if you deserve it, then you will get a bit higher.
So just touching on your team and the fact that you talked about balance, balancing fun and work and so on. This has been a male-dominated industry since its birth. What's the situation now, and how does that reflect in your own company?
Just looking back at the first couple of wind conferences that I at least participated in, it was only men. There was maybe a few women, but I think it's much more balanced today. Much more balanced as an industry and across all disciplines. So I really think that is at least an element of the industry where we have succeeded.
To our company, it means that we have almost a 50-50 distribution.
So imagine for a moment if you guys could wake up tomorrow, you'd wave that magic wand or wiggled your nose, whatever one you want to do, and things suddenly changed. What might you change and why? And think outside of your box right here, either within wind or just any other industry. What would you want to change? I mean, we're talking game changers here. So if you could just wish something to happen, what would you pick?
We are not experts in the universe. We are experts in offshore wind. So I think that's where we could do the change. And we sometimes wake up and then we get this kind of epiphany that, wow, this is something that will be of great importance for decision makers of our industry. And then we start preaching it. We start making aware. We start doing analysis at own risk and cost to understand, are we on the right track here? Does it really mean this much a difference? So it's basically an embedded part of our business model to sometimes wake up and then have this, this will make less green energy happen if we don't do something about it.
So you kind of feel a responsibility, even maybe to
we do to very
make these people
high
aware.
Degree.
Yeah, I think also at least a wish for the industry is that profitability of the supply chain is a big hope going forward. We've had a fantastic ability to become rather unprofitable. We, in the last decade, discussed levelized cost of energy a lot. We needed to bring down the construction cost of offshore. We as an industry, the operations and maintenance cost needed to go down. So on all parameters, we were just squeezing the lemon to get every penny out of the industry. And in doing that, we have also fostered a creature or an industry where we are just notoriously unprofitable across many segments, not all, but across a lot of segments. So you do find profitable pockets of the industry, but you also do find domains that are definitely unhealthy. And if that continues to be unhealthy, we will not be able to deliver the industry as in totality, simply because nobody wants to be in a business where you're losing money on a yearly basis.
And no one wants to do the investments that are needed at risk if it's not for some sort of profitability.
And I think that discussion also then ties back to, okay, what are we as a society willing to pay for? How far are we willing to go to enable that green transition? And what parameters are we playing on? Are we doing onshore wind, solar, where costs have also come dramatically down? Do we want to leverage in offshore wind? Do we want to do nuclear? Or is nuclear notoriously too expensive or too complicated or not acceptable for societies to have in our backyard? So at least a wish from my side, and that has been a wish for the last 15 years, is increased profitability for the supply chain. And I think in that there is the underlying question, how fast do we want to do technology development in our industry? Because it tends to become a hindrance for ourselves. So every time we go with a bigger turbine, there is the underlying risk that components grow in size. You need to build new facilities. You need to build new vessels. You need to go bigger and bigger on a daily basis, making all the investments you did the last 10 years potentially redundant. And that is not healthy for
the pace of innovation and the cost of innovation mean that there isn't enough time with the things that have been produced already to really make the profit off of those.
Yeah, that's what I was referring to earlier when I was asking about standards. You know, the industry's been growing so fast. It's still a relatively young industry, even though we've seen it running for 30 years here in Denmark.
The problem is that the technology is starting with the turbines, because that has been the driver here. They got bigger and bigger, and then so did everything else. The turbines, as they grew bigger, the turbines that were deployed in the offshore wind farms today were no longer sold. So it was the next generation platform that was sold. So you don't have learning curves. You have very big potential losses. If you have serial defects or things that didn't work as you planned for, then you don't just fix it and then you have an even better or version 2.0 of the same turbine. No, you're already on to the next one. And then when that is being deployed, it's the same dilemma again. That's a big problem, actually.
You can really see how that eats into the profitability, and will probably continue to eat into profitability over time.
But it is, and it will continue to be a question or an issue for the market, also in a much broader context. Again, having done my master thesis within the Chinese offshore wind market, turbine manufacturers in China are now promoting turbines of more than 20 megawatt. And what happens in the case where we say, as a European industry, potentially American industry, enough. let's cap it at least maximum 20 megawatt. But other markets continue to deploy and develop technology that are much, much bigger. That we can sit in Europe and the US and other markets to have our view of, okay, what is the right solution then? But other markets might not having the same viewing through the same lens, meaning Chinese turbine technology spilling over into developing markets. I think we have 190 coastal nations globally. I think 20 of those have offshore wind turbines. So we can sit on a pedestal in Europe and think that we have the solution to solve that part and make the industry profitable again. But it might not be the most, let's say, long-term profitable solution for neither the European industry.
That's kind of fascinating because, usually we say that competition is good for everybody. In this particular case, when competition is thinning out profitability, it's kind of bad for most people, you could say.
Yeah, and for the subcontractors, because then they're not allowed to make money, and it just puts pressure on every stakeholder. We need to save 10% of the 1% we do, and that additional 10% might come with a very, very high cost as an alternative to just deploying more of the same with the 99%.
Right. So I think it's fascinating that we do push for it. We do put in a lot of ambition to trigger that extra 10% or get that extra 1% completely out. So we are net zero as an industry. But in the short term and the urgency of deploying a lot more renewable energy and not only offshore wind, then there is the counter question. Should we maybe wait with some of those other aspects of improving our industry, which also ends up being an industry that potentially costs more than it does today?
So tell us, why do you do what you actually do? Why do you personally do what it is that you do?
Why do you do it?
Because I like challenges. This is really a challenge with a great impact. So bringing down complexity of something that is really, really high complexity to make it something that can actually do a difference. That's satisfying, and it's also personally challenging.
So you go into work, into the office, and you've got basically a jigsaw puzzle in front of you every day.
And we reassemble it, and it becomes a new picture compared to what we assembled yesterday, right? That's privilege.
And you
sounds like a good
get
fit
into
for
the
you.
heads of decision makers, CEOs, their management teams, executive leaderships. You get into the heads of states,
The most
regulators,
nerdy engineers.
the most nerdy engineers, state regulators, ambassadors, to try to bring a contribution to get this industry moving, to solve some of those issues and hindrance that we have on the path of getting the industry across the board. I think for me personally, it is such an interesting space because nothing is set in stone yet. And then kind of the next frontier in our industry moving to floating wind, where we have worked in the past 5 years, understanding that segment and how it fits into that ecosystem of offshore wind. Again, being complementary to fixed bottom wind. So if you can put in a foundation on a shallow water depth site, then you can also move it further out into 100 meters of water depth, 200 meters or 1,000 meters of water depth. And then it becomes a completely new frontier, again, forcing you to redesign the way you having to deploy that offshore wind farm.
So I'm hearing that the Kristians absolutely thrive on complexity and change, dynamic change. It's like,
That's true. And then I want to mention one more thing, which is also extremely important. I think it's so cool to start out as three, I'll not mention handsome guys, but I'll do it anyway. Semi-handsome guys. Starting out 3 guys, and then see that the baby that you helped give birth to is now growing. Seeing a team being built and complement each other, and finding out that what you recruited was only part of what you got, but actually what you got has even more value if you help nurse it. This gives satisfaction to work with clever individuals, I believe.
So you guys deal with all this complexity at work. What do you do outside of work for fun?
I have a tendency to buy a lot of gear, so I have to be honest that I don't really support. I'm not the best case for supporting CO2 reductions of our global economy. I really like to buy stuff. So I play golf. I do carbon-intensive sports. Where you buy a lot of equipment for. My wife is a doctor, so we've had a funny discussion on who has the most important job over the last couple of years. During COVID, it was maybe her, at least, thinking that she had the most important job. And then all of a sudden, we see the results of our CO2 heavy emissions on the global economy, and again, our lack of ability to reach climate goals. Then maybe I have the most important job, because if we don't fix that, then at least she's going to have a hell of a hard time at work.
I'm a more simple guy. I like doing a run with one of my grown-up children. I like enjoying a good red wine and a good dinner, and enjoying the view from our small stone house in Italy. That's about it. So it's about family, it's about relaxing, it's about not having to achieve something that we have to every day. It gives me pleasure, it gives me fun.
Yeah, you have to be somewhere you can take the pressure off of all of the concerns that you guys deal with on a daily basis.
Being with good friends we don't have to solve any problems, so to say. Just have to be.
I just love golf, and I think we are in an environment where we, again, in our capacity, support decision makers and really complicated issues of our industry and important issues of our industry. So going to the golf course, going around for 4 hours with no interference, no phone, with the intention of not thinking of all that complexity and all that turbulence of our industry, you still simply cannot help yourself to spend those 4 hours in trying to think about, okay, how do we then address some of that complexity? So you can say I at least use it to re-energize, but also have the calm or the quiet to give it a bit more deep reflection on, okay, how do we then elevate ourselves into the helicopter to look at that totality of our industry, and what can we then do to make the biggest impact? That at least provides energy.
I got to ask you guys, even on a day like this, we're sitting in a van, we're sitting next to forest, we've met up here to do the interview. We're hearing the wind. The van is even shaking from the wind. There's 15 meters per wind out there, 15 meters per second winds today. Do you guys feel in touch with when the wind blows like this? Do you think about the business?
No. I think about Danish winter. And it's been blowing a lot, the wind. But at least it's good for something. It's good for our industry.
Yes, it has.
I think our colleagues in office who are really strong and capable and have long careers in the turbine OEM segment, I think they also know, the two of us, that we find the big wind turbine a little bit uninteresting. It's all the rest that ties it together. So the complexity of foundations and cables and... So I think it brings a really balanced team effort, that we have the ability to both have somebody finding the turbine, that's the most interesting part, and then others in myself.
Blah. What do you care about with the wind is your hair?
Yeah, that's
I know that. I don't have that.
Oh, that's true.
I'm with you on that one.
So
that's true.
That
the wind took your hair many years ago.
Yeah, it did. Or you did.
So
yeah, it could be.
So it's streamlined efficiency is what
I used to have dreadlocks when I met Kristian.
Really?
Now it's gone.
Okay.
Are you serious?
No, I'm not serious.
So I'd like to thank you guys for coming on the show and sharing your knowledge with us and what Green Ducklings is doing, and look forward to how you help the world deliver that capacity to 2030. So thanks very much.
Yeah, I, for one, sure feel like I have a better, at least sympathetic or empathetic, I'm not sure, feeling of, oh my goodness, that's a challenge out there. The complexities of that industry.
Nothing that we can't manage.
Yeah, but wow.
Okay, yes, that's the confidence.
Thanks, guys. This has been a pleasure, and thanks for the invitation to come and share a bit of our world.
If you've got a game changer or know someone that does, go to our website at GameChangersVideoPodcast.com and send us a message. Your story could be on our show. And if you enjoy the show, tell a friend and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Until then, stay curious and keep changing the game. Thanks for watching and listening to the Gamechangers Video Podcast.